this is Grace with Blue Summit Supplies, and this is Behind the Blue. Today we're here with our CEO, Owen Franklin, and we're going to talk about books.
Yes, our favorite.
Our favorite. Well, your favorite. So what are we going to talk about today? What's the most recent book you've read?
Well, we're talking about the Infinite Game today. It may not be the most recent book, but It was like the last three.
All right. So one of the last three books you've read was The Infinite Game by, how do you pronounce his name?
Simon Sinek, I think.
Sinek. Okay.
Sorry, Simon, if I said that wrong. Please forgive me.
Probably right. Can you give me so what does it mean to play an infinite game? Let's start at the basic.
Well, let's talk about the difference, I think, between the contrast between a finite game and an infinite game. So
Okay.
A finite game is the game we all know. The game I think that all of us kind of relate to. Let's use American football because in Alabama it's a big deal. So a finite game is a game that has a fixed beginning, a fixed end. There's generally two players, let's say, and those players have to operate on a fixed set of rules. There's someone there to judge them, and at the end of the game, the rules determine a single winner. So let's take in Alabama, it's Alabama versus Auburn. So every year in November, Alabama plays Auburn, and Auburn usually wins. And at the end of that, they were probably right, but they did win last year.
Okay.
They start and there's 4 quarters. I think they're like 15 minutes each or something like that. I don't know, whatever. This doesn't really matter. And at the end, the highest person that has the highest points wins. So it's very finite. It ends. Whereas an infinite game is the opposite of that. So I think that the best analogy is life. Like, life does have an end, but you can't live life. At the end of your life, you can't win life. You can't, or let's say a career where even you might be able to compete with your colleagues for a promotion or compete with a competitor for a. Let's say you worked really hard to win a proposal and you won. It doesn't end. You still have to go to work the next day and execute that. And so there's no end. And so kind of the way the author defines it is the infinite game is a game that has no end. And the goal of an infinite game is to continue playing. So like for an organization, this is set in a very business context. So the goal of an organization is to perpetuate the game forever.
Yeah, and you just mentioned, you said obviously the book is set in a business context. Let's talk a little bit about finite-minded businesses versus infinite-minded businesses. Can you give me an example of a finite-minded business?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point to kind of see how this can be a shortfall. So I think let's use the example. There's a bunch of examples through business history. I'm sure we'll talk about a couple of them, but the book talks about Kodak, and so we all know Kodak. I think the late 20th century. George Eastman, I guess it would be the 19th century, the late 1800s, invented the camera that has a little thing come out the bottom. Mm-hmm. And it changed photography forever. Before that you had the big bulb and kind of like in the movies, like in
the big flash bulb.
Yeah, and it's just obnoxious, and who wants to get behind that? And God knows what chemicals are in it or whatever, but. So his vision was to bring photography to the masses. So you could go to the beach and you and your family could take a picture. I mean, think about that. You could have that memory. He's basically delivering memories forever. And he fundamentally changed the photography business for the entire industry, and was a company that lasted over 100 years. And 1976, I think it was the year, is some of his engineers invented the technology for a digital camera and patented a bunch of the technology. And obviously, as we know today, the digital photography business has fundamentally changed Kodak's business. It's changed how you and I shoot photography. And the leaders of Kodak said, no, we're not going to use that technology.
Wait, so they invented the technology, and then Kodak said, we're not going to use the technology.
Yeah, it's and their logic was the epitome of thinking finite-minded. They said, if we use this technology, it's going to destroy the film business that we have. They had a little film thing come out the bottom, and so they sell the physical camera and they sell that consumable, which is recurring revenue forever, until the customer buys another one. And so it would destroy the profits of their business. And they said they estimated, it'll be 10 years or so before someone else can field this technology, and we're just going to suck up the profits there. Like if you zoom out a little bit, like think about how how really bad that is. I mean, they favored some short-term gains for basically the destruction of their entire business. So what ended up happening was Nikon and Fujifilm basically invented the technology. They partnered together and they created digital photography, and they changed the game. And now here we are on a digital camera by Sony, there's Kodak no longer exists. I think Kodak was declared bankruptcy, 20 years later, and now is probably owned by someone else. It's that is kind of the shortfall. If you think very very short term, you can make those kind of decisions that could fundamentally change your business long term.
So, how then would you create an infinite-minded business? I know, so full disclosure, I've also read The Infinite Game. And Simon talks a lot, my friend Simon, he talks a lot about the importance of a just cause. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that lends to an infinite-minded business?
Yeah, so he lays out 4 or 5 ways to kind of, 4 or 5 key things leaders need to kind of embrace to live in an infinite game. And I think it could kind of take a step back. He talks about how, the game of business is very much an infinite game. We want the business to perpetuate forever. So if we think finite-minded like the leaders at Kodak, you generally fail in the long term. So his logic is to think about a business like a institution that's designed to last forever. And one of the key ways to do that is to develop a just cause. He defines a just cause as an infinite, as something that is some visionary, some idealistic version of the future that can never actually exist. A really good example of that was in his book. He talked about a Russian scientist, a guy named Vavilov.
I think it's Nikolai Vavilov.
Yeah. I can't say his name very well, but this guy was a botanist, some kind of chemist, and his just cause, his vision was to cure world hunger. To empower people to be able to grow and sustain crops so that he could feed the whole world. And by doing this, he tried to curate seeds and for crops all over the world. And so this way, he could do genetic engineering and make the crops more resilient, and also to kind of hold seeds in case there was natural disasters where the entire species could be destroyed. I guess if you call a crop a species, I'm not really sure, but you get the idea.
Sounds right.
So that was kind of his vision, and he was pretty famous in Russia. And so in 1920, the Leningrad Center of Botany or something like that, basically Stalin put him in charge of that, or maybe it was Stalin, or maybe it was a guy before Stalin. But anyway, so now he's the head of this botany organization in Leningrad, and he hires a bunch of scientists, and they start curating all these seeds of the crops all over the world. And what was so kind of powerful about this, and kind of just to demonstrate the power of a just cause, is that all these people, this is something that you can get behind. Trying to solve world hunger is, people get very passionate about that. That's a big deal, right? And so during World War II, the Germans had a siege on Leningrad. The people were starving, and his scientists continued to work on the crops and the seeds to try to proceed with his vision. And one of the scientists that was working for him said something to the effect of, when he was asked if he thought about eating the crops, he said, I couldn't even imagine doing so, because this was a calling of a lifetime. And so he was literally starving, hardly could get out of bed, and he would not eat the crops, as he wouldn't endanger this infinite vision of curing world hunger. And so, and also, I think it gives, kind of go back to the shortfalls of Kodak, where they were thinking very short term, trying to maximize short term profits. This kind of helps you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, and they even, what a finite-minded leader, a finite-minded member of this cause would have given these seeds or these crops to the starving people of Leningrad. He would have saved maybe 50, 100 150, however many lives. But by doing that, he would have hurt the possibility of saving hundreds of millions of lives.
Right.
And so he was able to use the just cause and think bigger, and keep the crops, and he never ate them. And great things have happened since then. The crop was saved during the siege, and they continue to do the work, and it's gone on to be used for I can't remember the specifics, but it's basically his vision continues to live on.
Yeah. So essentially, Vavilov's research sort of was the foundation for continued research. I think now there's a big seed library somewhere in like Antarctica or something. But yeah, it's like you said, if the difference in Kodak and this group of people was that Kodak was all about short-term profits and gains, and they made obviously a more dramatic sacrifice in human lives, but to further this infinite vision, this just cause. So in applying that sort of theory of just cause to our business, let's talk a little bit about what our just cause is and how you've taken the information, how you've taken this idea that Simon Sinek sort of gave you and you've applied it to Blue Summit Supplies. Yeah,
so let's just start with the just cause. So this is something that we've worked very hard on trying to define. It all kind of began when I read this book here, Built to Last. I started this business when I was an engineer, and I was just trying to make some money. I was trying to make $5,000 a month, and extra money, so I could help save it and retire early. That was kind of the idea, and it became a lot more than that very quickly. And then I ended up quitting my job, 15, 16 months in from starting. And I had this goal of I want to do $200,000 a month in revenue in October of 2017. And we got to October came and went. We did much more than $200,000 a month in revenue. And I kind of was like, well, shit, what do I do now? Where does this go? And so then I set some other arbitrary number. And then we hit that. It's just it's like this floundering effect of it's an infinite game. It never ends. You can try to think finite-minded. You can try to shoot for these short-term goals, but the fact is that those time windows, there's some arbitrary goal based on some arbitrary time frame. In this case, it was October of 2017, but that time always catches up to us, and you're going to either get to that, and you're going to meet it, or you're not, and then you're left with what do I do?
Now? Yeah.
What now? And that's kind of what the just cause is about, is in looking at it, zooming out and looking this as a bigger picture. And so, I read this book, and it talked a lot about, this book looked at 5 or 6, this is a really famous business book, 5 or 6 businesses and what made them truly successful, what made them endure. He uses the word visionary companies, and they endured, and he looked at companies only that were 50 years and older. And GE is one of the companies here. The company was founded by Edison in the late 1800s. And what's funny is he actually used the words big, hairy, audacious goals. That was one big thing that companies did to inspire their employees. And in the business community, some people refer to this as BHAGs, which I know you hate that acronym. But and so the moonshot was the perfect example of that. So 1961, JFK said we're going to go to the moon because it is hard, which is very inspiring and inspired an enormous amount of people. Huntsville, we built the rocket here in Huntsville that went to the moon. But that is not an infinite game, because what happened? In 1969, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon.
Right.
And then what? And so, they talk a lot about that in here. And what's funny is there's a quote in here in the book. It talks about once you reach the big, hairy, audacious goal, you must have another one, or the company stalls. And so the just cause addresses that. So the just cause is infinite. So for us, we've kind of gone back and forth about this. And we have Franklin Creative Solutions, which is the owner of the company, and then we have Blue Summit Supplies, which is the consumer-facing brand. And so for Franklin Creative Solutions, our core vision, as we call it, we use their words, is we strive to improve the lives of our sphere of influence. Our sphere of influence is everyone our operations touch. So to us as employees, me as a shareholder, the customers, our suppliers. We all try to look at the system as a whole and optimize for all of us. And we believe if we think long term, all of us are in self-interest. Right. Rather than just optimizing for a customer or just optimizing for the shareholder, which we see a lot of big corporations sometimes tend to do. And then as we go further, we look at Blue Summit Supplies. So Blue Summit Supplies delivers business products, office products to consumers, to businesses generally. And we're really I've had an enormous amount of fun starting a small business and running with it. And so we I went from a job that where I worked at Lockheed Martin right out of school, and I was very passionate about rockets, and it's what I wanted to do my whole life. And I went to work there, and I was so unhappy. Like, it was so demoralizing to be so energized for an organization and for the goal of building big, expensive, incredible things like rockets, and then just to be taking the wind out of me. And so, I kind of see Blue Summit Supplies as an ability, is to get in front of as many businesses as possible, and to kind of put our passion for business and make a positive impact on our customers, the businesses, and try to infiltrate their cultures and influence their cultures to build cultures in which they build cultures themselves that optimize for their employees as well, and try to build an organization that makes their employees happy. We want to change the way people view work. We had talked about this one day. What did we say? Like, we interviewed somebody and asked them, we interviewed some people
Oh, we did. Yeah. So we asked people sort of off the cuff, when we tell you that you spend 40% of your time at work, how does that make you feel? And across the board, the response was more or less like, ugh, to hear 40% of your time at work, it's so much of your time. And generally, like you were saying, people don't, if you were given the option, would you like to go to work or would you like to have the day off? You're almost always going to choose the day off. And so 40% of your time at work is not a pleasant thought. And we think that shouldn't be the case, right?
No, it shouldn't, because unfortunately, the world we live in, we have to have money to feed ourselves, right, and to do the things we enjoy, And so a job has to provide, it has to be economically viable. The job has got to provide for the employees. Right. But it shouldn't stop there. The reality is you spend 30 or 35 or 40% of your time at work, I think it was your waking hours, at least. That's what it was. And, it should be an experience where you can actually go to work and be fulfilled and leave work feeling happy.
Right.
And so, we work very, very hard to kind of create an environment in which our employees enjoy coming here, and our employees are challenged. Our employees can leave the day, feeling fulfilled. And it's something that we're trying to influence our customers and really our colleagues to try to do the same thing. And our goal is to provide that, to offer resources and that, I guess to set an example and provide the information to try to inspire other companies to do the same thing.
So in short, our just cause more or less is what we'd come up with. And we're still tinkering with it, is that we want to use our office supplies as a vehicle to empower companies to create cultures where employees want to come to work, or they enjoy it, or they feel fulfilled, right?
Yeah, you generally, I say what in 100 words, what you can say in 20.
It's my job. But
that's exactly right. Is in the kind of way that hits my gut is to try to remove the feeling of when someone says you spend a huge portion of your waking hours at work, from a negative feeling to a positive.
Which is an infinite goal.
We can never achieve that.
No, because I think that, exactly. I think we have the awareness of knowing that we can't completely overhaul the entire workforce and make everyone love their jobs. But with it being an infinite goal, we can be constantly striving towards it, right? And forever sort of chipping away at it.
Yeah, and it gives us something to use as a litmus test to make decisions. It gives us something to work towards, and if we go back to the Kodak example, is that, one of George Eastman's biggest, his just cause was to bring photography to the masses. And think about what the digital camera has done. Think about what your iPhone, that is digital photography. It's brought saving of memories to your fingertips, and that's what his vision was. And his executives, 80, 100 years later, lost that vision. And the company failed,
right?
And at least it failed in that regard. And so, the just causes kind of helps the individual zoom out and look at the big picture and try to make decisions off longer term consequences.
So a minute ago, you were speaking about the purpose initially of Blue Summit Supplies, right? Which was this very finite-minded, small goal of making $5,000 a month so that you could own around more. But let's talk about
whatever that means.
Whatever that means. Let's talk about the purpose of business as a whole. So Simon Sinek mentions Milton Friedman versus Adam Smith. Can you talk a little bit about that? About the sort of the start of capitalism versus what it's become.
So this book here, Wealth of Nations, which I've tried to read, and maybe one day when I'm smarter and more educated, I can read it and understand it, because it's kind of hard to read. But basically, Adam Smith is the father of capitalism. He had enormous influence on our founding fathers, and he defined what the free market economy was. He defined the term the invisible hand, and he defined kind of capitalism as we know it. And there was a quote in the book, in The Infinite Game, about an excerpt from the Wealth of Nations. And it basically talks about how the entire point of a producer is for the good of the consumer. And then he went on to say something to the effect of, to try to prove that would just be useless because it's so obvious. I mean, the entire function of a business is to serve the consumer. If the business does not serve the consumer, serve the interest of the consumer, then it shouldn't exist. It can't exist, because if the consumer is not happy with the business, there is no business. Mm-hmm. If no one will give you money, then you have no business.
Right.
And so if you think about that, it's very fundamental. Like it's and to his point, to me, it makes perfect sense. And then the beauty of that is that what ends up happening is that people pursue their own self-interest to do the best job they can to serve the customer. And so in the long term, as we compete with each other, what he calls the invisible hand, and people pursuing their own self-interest, that businesses will be better and the economy will be better, is the idea. He makes the example to a baker. The bakers are trying to make the best bread possible because that means more customers want it. But he's pursuing his own self-interest of making the best bread possible, and it makes the whole system better. And then there was a guy named Milton Friedman that I think I don't know, what was it, like 1980s?
It was the 80s, yeah.
Basically published, I don't know if it was a book or a big document or whatever, but he had an enormous amount of influence on business schools and really kind of schools of thought in business, basically saying that the shareholder, the sole role of an executive was to optimize the business for the owners, which is quite different than what Adam Smith envisioned. And
it's a complete opposite, right?
Yeah, and if you think about that, it doesn't make any sense. Like, if the customer is unhappy with the product or services, they're not going to pay for it, and pretty quickly you're not going to have a business.
Right.
And you can kind of rest on the coattails of the past, or you have old products and services that people still need, and you can sustain for a while, but in the infinite game, that's not going to serve you very well long term. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of, and the author makes a lot of analogies to a lot of the way executives are compensated today. So executives, like he talks about how executive pay has gone from like 32 times the average worker to like 800 times the average worker in the Fortune 500 companies today in the United States. And generally the CEO and the C-suite executives in public companies are incentivized by their stock price. And so if the stock price goes up, they make a lot of money, and they make tens of millions of dollars a year. And so a lot of the goals they make are to drive the stock price up, which may or may not be in sync with their vision, with their core, with their core vision and their just cause. And so, the author talks about, actually, it was a different book I read about accounting. It's this book right here. What was it called? Financial Intelligence. Yeah, for those of you who don't know accounting, it's a good book. It's been helpful to me to try to figure out, so I can talk to my accountant. It's still a work in progress, but I digress. But it talked about Enron. I mean, not Enron. Enron was another
disaster.
Yeah, that's a good word. Talked about waste management. So it talked about how the executives of waste management basically changed how they depreciate all their fixed assets. So they have, waste management, the garbage company, they have those big garbage trucks and big garbage bins, and those things are really expensive. And they changed how they depreciated them, basically changing the depreciation schedule to go further, to longer, which means that their costs are less per year. When you have less costs, you have more profit. Right. And so like in the first year they did that, their profit went up like $716 million. I mean, something crazy. And their stock price went up. But you think about that, they're paying 30%-ish on that. So we're talking about like $200 million more in taxes for no business fundamental change. They just changed how the accounting was done. Not very wise in any regard. And so that kind of goes back to kind of more optimizing their business for what Milton Friedman said, which was for the owners to make their share price go up, rather than the customers, because now that company has it's paid $200 million more in taxes. So now it has $200 million less that it can use to invest for the long term.
And didn't it get investigated for fraud?
Yeah, the SEC came in and got mad, and I think they ended up having to sell the company. Yeah. And then the executives, I don't know if they ever went to prison, but they got in a lot of trouble, and it was a disaster. It was not a positive.
Which is again a prime example of a finite-minded. Right?
Sure. I mean, they're optimizing for the immediate gain of Wall Street today rather than the future of the company tomorrow.
So do you think that to follow Friedman's sort of methodology of capitalism is inherently finite-minded?
I mean, it has to be. It kind of goes. It's really kind of been a funny transition for me. We talked about my initial goal. I mean, I remember sitting in the office of my boss at the company called Dynetics, which is a great Huntsville company, defense contractor, and we were working on like proposals, and I was talking to we were talking about margins and how we price out stuff, and I said, I was like, James, what kind of margin do we expect? What kind of margin are we making? Because the whole point of a business is to make money. Sure. That's why we're here. Those are the words I used. And at the time, I fundamentally agreed with that statement, and now I fundamentally disagree. I think there's so many quotes. Like, to me, I like to use the gasoline example. Is it like a car? The function of a car is not gasoline, to use gasoline, right? I mean, that would be very unfortunate because gasoline costs money. It's really cheap right now, but it costs money. And the function of a car is to transport you, right? And gasoline is just a tool to get what you want, to be transported. And business, to me, profit and money is like that to a business. Like, the function of a business is its just cause. But if you don't make any money, then you can't go anywhere. Like Phil Knight talked about it in his book, saying, I don't know quite where we're going yet, but I know we're going to need a hell of a lot of money to get there. But he goes on and on talking about how business is not about money. I mean, there's so many great founders that say that. Henry Ford, Jobs, Elon. I mean, all these great icons of business. I don't even remember what the hell you just asked. What am I just droning off? You did a great job. No, droning off and
that's so unlike you.
Yeah,
I know.
No,
you did a good job. I did want to ask though. So we spoke a little bit about a lot about infinite game versus finite game, and at the very beginning we were talking about football as an analogy. And what I want to know is what your thoughts are, or what you've learned about other players in an infinite game, right? So in a finite game, other players are almost always adversaries. How does that differ when you're playing an infinite game?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. So the author talks about what he calls worthy rivals. And so he uses the analogy of him with a guy named Adam Grant, I think was his name. He's another real famous business, productivity, inspirational business author, much like Simon Sinek. And Simon said that in his book, as if I'm his friend, just like
hey,
you,
we did it. Yeah.
He talks about how he was kind of intimidated by Adam, and he was always kind of seeing what he was publishing and where he was speaking, and he said one time they got on stage and they started talking, and they both were kind of insecure about each other, and he started to realize this is so stupid, this is so counterproductive to me, worry about that. And then he makes the analogy, which I think is so true, is he says we can both win. People can buy 2 books. Mm-hmm. Hell, there's 6 of them sitting right there. Yep. And there's a lot more in our main office. And so, I think that the contrast between what he calls infinite minders think of worthy rivals and finite minded think of competitors, mm-hmm. they're completely different. So a worthy rival is someone you aspire to be, someone that motivates you to be better. Like, to me, it's Amazon. Like, Amazon, I think, is one of the greatest companies ever built. Jeff Bezos started it 25 years ago and has embraced a lot of the books that are sitting here in front of us. It has built an organization that is just unfathomable to me. I get to go out there. I have the luck to go out there and visit and meet with his employees and see what they're doing and how their culture's been implemented and how they're always thinking way down the road. Talk about being infinite-minded. It's inspiring. Whereas if you get so caught up in a competitor, then you forget to do your job and to get better rather than trying to take inspiration from those that you're competing with. It's the difference between having an abundance mindset, that there's the market is full of abundance, rather than being very thinking about we're squabbling over some scarce resources, and that's kind of the difference there. And there's been great companies like Apple versus Microsoft, and Apple was so infinite-minded for so long, whereas Microsoft kind of the author talks so much about Apple as when Steve Ballmer took over Microsoft, kind of thinking very finite-minded and obsessing over Apple's products rather than trying to optimize his business. The author talks about you need to be the best at improving, not be the best. And Apple was so good at that. Microsoft struggled so long, and I think now both of those organizations have great leaders, but in the early 2000s, I think that Microsoft really struggled against Apple.
So can you talk a little bit about how an infinite-minded mindset sort of prevents what Simon Sinek refers to as ethical fading? I think that's also a really important point to talk about, since we spoke a little bit about Milton Friedman and his sort of view that shareholders should profit and how that, can negatively impact sort of the business as a whole and consumers. But I want to know what you think about, how does that help combat that?
Yeah, I think, does he go into the Wells Fargo scandal in the book? I don't remember.
I'm not sure. I think
I know.
I've heard you talk about it so much, but I'm
so
conflating
there's I can't, there's a Netflix show called Dirty Money that talks, it's like an hour-long show about it. And this is like the most epic example of ethical fading. And I hate to say that like as if it's a positive, but it's just a great example of the shortfalls of not being infinite-minded in business. And so Wells Fargo is a great company who started, in the 1800s, way early 1800s, And one of the largest banks in the world, did an excellent job through the financial crisis. Was probably the strongest big bank to come through the crisis. But their culture has become toxic, and they had an enormous amount of pressure from the top, which was being pressured by the owners, the shareholders, to create more bank accounts. More bank accounts means more people to sell services to, therefore it means the stock will go up. More bank accounts equals more stock growth, equals more money for the CEO. And so they pushed this so hard. And it created a culture of unethical behavior, and it happened slowly. And so, the Netflix show talked about how they interviewed, a bunch of people, and she said that there was one lady that was a banking officer, I think in maybe some smaller town in California, and she ran the numbers, and within like 6 or 8 months, she had fixed goals as to how many bank accounts she had to sign up each month. And she counted, and after 6 or 8 months, she would have had to sign up every single person in her county. Something just, her plus the other associates.
Sure.
Something just outrageous, something completely undoable. And so what ended up happening is that people were like, this is ridiculous. And they just started creating fake bank accounts. First she said I'd call my cousins and say, hey, can you open another one? Hey, can you open another one? And then they started creating fake people. And what ended up happening when they did that was one person did it and that person got rewarded. And here I am being ethical, not making up fake bank accounts by all logic is unethical.
Right.
They didn't get rewarded and they did. And
so what you're saying, hold on, that was a little, so what you're saying is that you have one teller or associate who's opening fake bank accounts, and then the top level is saying, good job, you did it, here's an accolade.
And here's
then
money.
Here's money. And then you've got their other colleague who has not opened any fake bank accounts and is being ethical, and they're not getting anything.
And so it encourages people to cheat. And the managers are encouraging cheating. And over 5 or 10 years, however long, they opened 5.5 million bank accounts or something.
Yeah.
Something just outrageous. They ended up getting in a bunch of trouble. The CEO had to step down. Now they're going through SEC and FTC or whoever it is, one of the 3-letter business acronyms for some government agency investigating them. It's a terrible situation. And so to kind of go back to your question, How does this relate to, how does a just cause help solve that problem? And I think that it comes from the top. Leader is responsible for, the CEO is, Simon Sinek uses the word chief vision officer. Mm-hmm. So the CEO his job is to champion the just cause of the organization, not put some arbitrary target of financial gain, which is what happened. And, I think the just cause allows you to think bigger and to not allow short-term problems, short-term goals to get in the way of that vision. I think it gives you more clarity, and it allows you to kind of think towards the future rather than getting so caught up. Like we go back to my experience. Like I had that goal for revenue goal in October, without any kind of just cause at the time. So I would have done anything. I'd like to think I would have done anything unethically, but
Sure.
but I worked very hard to meet that goal. And as you work towards that goal, and then you set another one and another one, the goals might become unattainable, and then you might slowly creep into unethical behavior over time.
I think it's important to say it's fading, and I think it's also really important to sort of point out that when you're working towards a hard number goal, especially one that seems impossible or is literally impossible to achieve, versus working towards a goal like solving world hunger, your motivations and your actions are so different, right? Like that one goal is I have to hit this number at all costs, whereas solving world hunger or trying to improve workplace culture, these are, I don't want to say softer goals, because it's not that they're easier or less important. It's just that I feel like there are so many other ways to go about. Like if one thing doesn't work with this goal, with the just cause, you just try a different route, and I feel like there are infinite different routes you can take to reaching that goal. Whereas if it's I need X bank accounts by February 12th, you've got like one route to take to do that. Two, I guess, if you're going to be unethical and you're just going to lie. So I do feel like inherently those hard number goals are more likely to lead to ethical fading than these sort of lofty things that you just keep trying different things at.
I think that's well said. I think it does that. I think that if you just think about your reaction. You just think about objectively about yourself when you hear the words "try to work towards world hunger" or "try to open 50 bank accounts."
Right.
Think about how you feel about that. Now, of course, to work towards world hunger, you're going to have short-term goals.
Right. You have to achieve.
But as long as you keep the bigger vision, I think to me it inspires teamwork. It inspires inspiration. It inspires people to get their hands dirty and get the job done. Whereas the alternative, you get caught up in the numbers, and sometimes in a big organization, or really even in a small organization, things can creep, and you end up with a culture or ethical actions that may not be so, unethical actions that you may not be so proud of. I
do think that the hard number goals can lead to more like tunnel vision, where it feels very singular, whereas the other one is, and again, that's to the point of worthy rivals, right? Where it's like, if you're working towards number goals and this like finite goals, then it does feel very isolating and everyone else is a competitor. But if you have these big ideals that you're trying to achieve, then it's sort of like the more the merrier, because we're all working towards the same very big, unattainable thing.
Yeah, and it's been kind of reading this book and kind of having these conversations have been kind of liberating for me a little bit, because I have all these quotes behind me that talk about failure and how important that is to progress. You get so caught up in the short-term goals that you just kill yourself with stress, and if you kind of allow yourself to zoom out a little bit and put things in perspective, you realize that these short-term failures are only, as I call them, just stepping stones to like I'm paying the toll, as I like to say, to the success that we want to reach. And then it kind of goes back to as well, using these your just cause to set those short-term objectives to make sure they're in line. And we could go all day about this, but you get the idea.
So I also wanted to talk about Blue Summit Supply specific. No one is unaware of this, but we just went through a pandemic, or we're still going through a pandemic. I shouldn't say it's over. And how did you sort of apply what was in this book to how you handled the company during that uncertain time? During this uncertain time. Oh God, I used the phrase uncertain times.
You've been reading too much.
I've been reading too much marketing.
I mean, I remember that, like March 16th was a Monday, and it was like when things just came crashing, revenue just came crashing down, and I was just terrified that, what was going to happen. I didn't know when it was going to come back. I didn't know how long this was going to last. And fortunately, the business had been doing well, and we had a little bit of a cash cushion, so which we were very fortunate. But revenue got cut in half almost overnight within a week period. It was gone from let's say $100 to $50, maybe $45, and we were definitely unprofitable. I mean, definitely. And I think if I was in the mindset I was 2 years ago, I would have slashed everything I could, which probably would have been people, and because that was the prudent, as Milton Friedman would say, thing to do. Is that your whole point is to maximize profit for the shareholder. And if I think about that, like, it's a lot of companies tried to hold on. They furloughed employees, and I think generally speaking that companies have done a very good job at that. I've been pretty impressed, frankly. But I mean, economic conditions dictate sometimes you have to do that, right? But how did we deal with that? I remember sitting there, the 16th, the 17th, 18th of March, laying in bed and thinking about what was going on, and I was scared to death. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where it was going to go. But I remember thinking, like, I have got to make this work for my people, for our sphere. We talked about, what is the function of this company, is to improve the lives of our sphere. The last thing in the world I want to do is let my people go, to break up our sphere. But it would have hurt a lot, and it would have been very, very against our core vision and just cause. And so, I remember getting on the phone and calling our bankers and being like, one of our basically our CFO, ran through the financial, basically just burn rate, and looked at how long can we last at 45% revenue, and how much cash do we need to do that, and we jumped to that. And my first reaction, again, kind of not I guess not get too technical. The first reaction was, how do we sustain this for? I think I tried to get through like September. How do we sustain this revenue to survive, to not have to lay anyone off? Like, that was my first reaction. I think that and again, like, every business has to be viable. Like, right. You can't. We talked about gasoline. Like, you can't run a car without gasoline. But the point was to preserve the gasoline for as long as I could, to keep my people together. And that was kind of our reaction, because that's what our business was about. Whereas if I was optimizing for money, that wouldn't have been the reaction I took. Now, long term, I may have had to do that, because if the business fails, then no one can have a job. The sphere is gone. But it makes you jump to the bigger vision first, rather than jumping to the small. It's a very subtle difference. But I think it's very, very important.
I agree. So I think that what you're saying there is that a finite-minded sort of mindset would have been following the Friedman school of thought, where you just cut and you kind of draw everything in, and you're like, okay, the business needs to survive. I need to make sure that the business, aka the shareholders or whoever is making or has the most money possible, which would have meant cutting people. But instead, you were thinking, I need to keep my team together so we can weather this storm, and then together we can continue working towards that just cause. So it wasn't about, I need to hit this revenue goal or whatever, which is arbitrary. It was about, I need to keep everyone together, and I'm going to do whatever I can to make that happen, so that we can continue long-term carrying out this just cause.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. We had a budget for March. We had a budget for April. We had a budget for May.
Right.
And that budget had a profit number at the bottom. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, I mean, not even against the just cause, just thinking about this like, I think this is just maybe thinking longer term, thinking more infinite-minded. Think about the true economics and business standpoint of that. Like, I saw some businesses cut jobs that probably could have sustained,
right.
But they would have just lost money in the short run. But the way I looked at it is, to me, let's say we lost $50,000 a month because I kept my employees. I mean, I'm just making a number up here, for 2 months. It's $100,000 in losses. To me, that's a laughable amount of money compared, actually in real dollars. Let's take $100,000 in real dollars. That's a laughable amount of money to what means more to me is my people. Not to mention the goodwill of the people that I'm employing. Yeah. Not to mention just the right thing to do. Like I was willing to lose that amount of money to keep my people together. Not to mention the fact that if we let someone go, we're investing all this time and money in these people to grow. Mm-hmm. If we think infinite-minded, the more experience you get in a company, the more valuable you are over time.
Right.
And so to risk not being able to get that employee back would be much more costly than $50,000. So like even like just if you think just from the whole economics of the business, it's very short-term focused just to meet some little stupid number on my Excel sheet. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, we have the luxury of, in our defense, we did have some cash and we had the luxury of having one owner and we don't have to answer to Wall Street.
Sure.
So that's a little bit different. I can't understand the pressures that those leaders go under. But I mean, if you think about it, there's a very good economic case of thinking longer term and thinking that's not a very good business decision.
Right. So sort of as a parting thing, I wanted to talk about what advice you might have in the context of the infinite game for somebody who was in your position 3 years ago. You're starting this business, you have these goals, $5,000 a month, $200,000 a month. What would you say to somebody in that position besides read the infinite game?
Read the infinite game, read Built to Last, read Principles.
Okay. Something a little more actionable.
It is actionable. There's 3 books you need to read. But think bigger. I think that getting caught up on money is a mistake. I think that you'll find if you're really successful, which hopefully one day I can say that, but I'm probably never, going back to the infinite mindset, I'll never be happy with it. But, find that money, Ray Dalio talks so much about this in Principles that, this is a man that went from nothing to $20 billion. And he said after you get to a certain point in income, money makes no material impact. But think bigger. Think about what you stand for. Think about what you want. And don't be discouraged when you don't know. Because it's taken us 2.5 years, 3 years. We've been working very diligently on this with lots of people's help, mentors, employees, coworkers. And I don't think we're quite there yet. As we say, we're still kind of stumbling with the words, But to think bigger and to... really just like I said, just not be discouraged by the fact that you don't know yet. And I'll leave you with this parting example. So we're being filmed right now on a Sony digital camera. In 1945, the founder of Sony, I'm not going to try to say his name, started Sony in a bombed-out shelter in Japan right after World War II, and he had no business, no revenue. He had just working on a failed heating pad product or some kind of product that never came to be. And he sat down and wrote a manifesto about what his business was going to stand for and why it was in existence and what it was going to do. And he talked about elevating the Japanese culture to the world because obviously it had taken a beating in the previous years of the war. And just think about that, like a business owner that was literally had no revenue, no business. Someone asked him what he was doing and how he was doing it. He had nothing. And yet he took the time to write out a big manifesto as to why he was doing business and what he was going to do with the business. And we're sitting here being recorded by his product 60, 70 years later. Mm-hmm. That says something to me. So think about that. And as you're starting a business, think about what you stand for. And just keep thinking about it. Don't give up because you're not going to know the answer right off the bat. But just keep thinking about it, keep iterating on it, and one day you'll get and we haven't talked about this either, but like the satisfaction you get by bringing a team together for a bigger goal than yourself will make you much, much happier than making $100, $1,000, $1 million, or $100 million. I genuinely believe that. I have a lot of life left, and hopefully I will continue that vision. But I think that I believe that firmly today.
Well, thank you, Owen, and thank you, Simon Sinek. I think we nailed it. Go read The Infinite Game.
Thank you, Grace.
Great commercial. Thank you.